Okay, welcome to the second day of our Rocky Mountain Economic Summit. For those I didn't get to meet yesterday, I'm Don Rissmiller, do economic research at Strategas, and I'm also the GIC Vice Chair of Programs. So I think we have a very special second day here. But before we get started, I was talking with Tyler, and we want to again thank all of our sponsors. Won't list them by name, but you can see them on the board here. It makes this possible. Also, some GIC business. I'll just list some of the upcoming programs for anyone who might be interested. We have a program on what's happening in Cuba. That's going to be in Sarasota, Florida, September 11th. We have a delegation to Mexico City, October 4th through 6th. Fayetteville, Arkansas. We're going to do a panel on the global economy, November 6th. We have a central banking series meeting in Japan on November 10th through the 13th. We'll be in Frankfurt, February 8th and 9th of next year, Buenos Aires, March 8th and 9th of next year, and Salt Lake City, March 23rd. So if any of those are of interest to you, please see myself or Jill Fornito, who's our Executive Director. Thank you, Jill, and we can also provide any information for anyone interested. So I'm going to turn the program over to Michael McNiven, and he's going to talk about the Global Citizen Award to start us off.
Thank you and good morning. It's a pleasure to be here. It's a pleasure for me to present the Global Citizen Award today to Dennis Lockhart. I myself am not very important, but I can say I was the first international sponsor of Global Interdependence Center. So if I have any credibility here, it was many years ago I met David Kotak on a train. In fact, we were headed to the NABE conference. It was 2003. And I worked for the Financial Times, and I was based out of New York. And David sat next to me, and first thing he said to me is, "Are you going to the NABE conference?" Kind of an odd introduction. And I said, "Yeah, I'm the sponsor." And he said, "How does that work?" And so I said, "Well, I have a check, and I'm looking for people who have global monetary and international trade interests." And he said, "Well, I happen to be the program chair of a group called the Global Interdependence Center who has global monetary and trade interests." And so that's how we struck a deal. And I guess it's been love ever since. So today I'm very happy to present to Dennis Lockhart the Global Citizen Award. You have in your possession, hopefully, this pamphlet, which was put together just for today's event. You'll see that several of prior winners have made some dedications to Dennis, so please take a look at that. I want to just give a little bit of information. It's in the program there, but I want to talk a little bit about Dennis's background, which is really extensive and is kind of a prime example of the type of globally interested person that the Global Interdependence Center likes to have as member, and also to have folks like that contribute to the global dialogue. So Dennis Lockhart's career includes time in the private sector, academia, and government, and he recently stepped down from the position of President and CEO of the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta. And we've appreciated here at the Global Interdependence Center his support for GIC events. Before becoming a central banker, Lockhart was a member of the faculty of Georgetown University's Walsh School of Foreign Service, where he chaired the master's program's concentration in global commerce, finance, and international business. He also was an adjunct at Johns Hopkins University School of Advanced International Studies. I find it pretty interesting, and you'll see on a bit of his background here that he was managing partner of a boutique private investment firm with activity in Africa and Latin America, and president of Heller International Group, a financial firm with activities in Europe, Asia, and Latin America. In 2000, he chaired the advisory committee of the U.S. Export-Import Bank. He began his career at Citibank, the original Citicorp, and had responsibilities in Lebanon, Saudi Arabia, Greece, Iran, Latin America, and Southeast U.S. He was educated at Stanford University and Johns Hopkins University, and not to forget, served as an officer in the U.S. Marine Corps. So thank you for your service. I wanted to read something from David Kotok, who's the Chief Investment Officer of Cumberland Advisors and the former program chair of GIC. And so he wrote a little dedication here, so I'm going to read it in his words and try not to embellish it too much. Okay, so this is from David Kotok. He says, "Congratulations, Dennis, a recipient of the Global Interdependence Center's Global Citizen Award. The honor is richly deserved. As president of the Atlanta Federal Reserve Bank, you partnered with the Global Interdependence Center and colleagues at the Federal Reserve Bank to advance worldwide dialogue on food, water, and security." You remember that jaunt around the world that we did. "It was my privilege to work with Dennis and chair that event for 2 years as it met on 5 continents in various convocations and assemblages. You personally intervened to assist and advance the purposes of GIC in that global effort. You were a speaker at several of the program venues. You authorized and assisted GIC in work in Africa that led to construction of a price index for a country that was struggling at the time. You also helped advance connections in the healthcare arena in the Atlanta area and elsewhere in the world." As we know, the healthcare piece of the district, right, that you were president of. GIC can point to initiatives that led to the creation of clinics in African countries. Maybe there's some in the room here that were connected and are running those clinics. So everyone makes a contribution. Appreciate your contribution in that regard. Also led to important discussions about viral threats around the world. You helped advance those initiatives. You did so quietly, robustly, and personally, and we thank you for that. GIC Central Banking Series generally focuses on monetary policy, and the elements of the GIC agenda include trade, commerce, and exchanges among people and countries of the world. The key word in GIC's name is interdependence. Reflects the elements, has done so for nearly half a century. One of the unique contributions, unique attributes of the GIC is that it convenes worldwide dialogues from a neutral platform. It becomes a place where public officials and private individuals can articulate their views about which they may or may not agree, but dialogue is conducted in a cordial and collegial environment. When GIC convenes such a dialogue and brings people of goodwill together every so often, something good takes place and the world is a better place. So thank you for your contribution, Dennis, in those regards. Through your tenure as president of the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta, your work with the Global Interdependence Center, and your activism as a public official, a private citizen, and a caring individual, you have advanced the ideals of GIC and demonstrated your commitment to them. You've been a leader in that regard. So congratulations to a friend, a longtime colleague in GIC's efforts to make the world a better place. David Kotok, former program chair and former chair of the GIC Central Banking Series. Let's give a hand to Dennis Lockhart. Congratulations.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Lovely. That's great. All right, Jim.
Okay, so the speech will be forthcoming.
Yeah, it's about to come.
It's about to come. So what we want to do right now is invite Michael McKee from Bloomberg Television. He's going to come up and conduct a Q&A, which will allow Dennis to give us his views on many topics. So, Mike, come on up. Thank you.
Mike, why don't you go ahead and sit down, and let me just say a few words of thank you to the Global Interdependence Center. I have, in fact, participated in a number of programs. I think this is the third time I've been here. And the first one I remember very vividly was at the Bank of France, probably around 2008 or 2009. You can't forget the Bank of France. And then David gave me some credit for the activity with a small African country and their price index. I couldn't go, but I insisted one of the best economists at the Atlanta Fed, who happened to be a specialist on inflation, go all the way to Zambia, I believe is where that meeting was, and help them put together their index. And so, yes, I believe strongly in what the Global Interdependence Center does, and have enjoyed my association, and I'm, deeply honored by receiving this. I do think of myself, in some respects, as a global citizen. The true story is that I was evacuated from Lebanon during the Civil War. I left Iran during a revolution. I was in New York on 9/11, and I joined the Fed in March 2007 and ushered in a financial crisis and the worst recession in 50 years. So my close friends see cause and effect between all of those events. And so thank you so much for this, this very nice honor. And now Mike and I are just going to have a conversation. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay.
You, yeah, interesting background there. I'm just wondering, with all those disasters that followed, what are you going to do next? Who should we warn?
What should we worry about?
Well, I'm told as an interlocutor, you're supposed to make your subject comfortable, and we've done this many times. Talk about things that that you're familiar with, so we could ease into it this way. Maybe saying, "When's the Fed going to raise rates again?"
My base case is December, with an announcement in September on the balance sheet. I think actually the committee has a lot of flexibility. They have communicated the balance sheet activity, I think, quite well. There'll be more details to come out, so there no doubt will be either an addendum to a statement coming out of the perhaps the September meeting, or some other way of communicating in detail how it's going to work. But it's been well signaled. People understand this is going to happen. I think, although Chair Yellen didn't say anything really new in her testimony, I think she reiterated that the committee is moving in the direction of normalizing the balance sheet. So if you have to sort of figure out a sequence of events, I would say probably September for the balance sheet and December for the next rate increase. But they could do both together. It depends a lot on how the data behave between now and the September meeting.
Data dependent.
Data dependent.
That raises a question that a lot of people ask. With inflation actually going down lately, why is the Fed raising interest rates? What do they want to accomplish?
Well, I take at face value the consensus, which is not everyone on the committee, but the consensus of the core of the committee, that they honestly believe that the recent softness in the numbers is in fact transitory, and that there are temporary effects going on that will pass through, and that we will see a firming in the inflation numbers later this year and into 2018, and that will validate the view that in fact inflation will move in the medium term to the 2% target. But you're putting your finger on probably one of the most important or the most critical swing issues in how policy plays out over the next year or more. And that is just, how does inflation really behave? Now, at a 50,000 foot level, I would say all the orthodox theory about how our economy operates suggests that as labor markets tighten, we'll see wages pressed higher, and that will translate into some inflationary pressure. The continuing relatively strong consumer demand and so forth will also support inflation, and we should see inflation move a little higher gradually. But if it doesn't happen, then there has to be a rethink. I'm talking in a very high level here, but there has to be a rethink of do we really understand how inflation operates in today's economy? And we have to kind of, I think, do that rethink by looking at the experience of other countries, probably most notably Japan. To try to understand, what really causes price movement and price behavior in the economy.
how much of that has already started in the corridors of the various Fed banks and in Washington?
Well, understand that since February 28th, I'm just like everybody here and you, Mike. My nose is to the window, and I'm trying to figure out what's going on the inside. So I don't know if serious staff work has been done on the inflation. Oh, in the past, there have been, I recall, briefings on the Phillips curve and the behavior of wages in the economy, and but I don't know that sort of a fundamental relook at inflation. I'm not sure it's necessary quite yet, but I don't know whether they're tackling that or not. I think the committee and the chair have a base case, and their base case is that this is temporary softness in the numbers, and we'll see firmer inflation numbers later in the year and into next year. So I am only suggesting that this needs to be studied and understood if we have a kind of persistent soft inflation numbers and the inability to get the inflation numbers up to the 2% target. And we've had a long period here, number of years, with inflation below the target. And for many of those years, we were at the zero bound in terms of interest rates, and we were throwing quantitative easing at the economy and still couldn't get the inflation numbers to target. So there is, at least in my mind, a kind of a nagging question of whether a rethink is going to be required. You ask, why are they doing it? I think they believe that the economy is performing well. Understand that the true north for the Federal Open Market Committee is the dual mandate and the two objectives. And so one of those two objectives is substantially achieved. There may be some more slack in the labor markets, but it's substantially achieved. And if they really believe that the soft inflation numbers are temporary, the other one is within range. And certainly when you have those mandates largely accomplished, it seems to me quite reasonable to be normalizing interest rates.
Well, let's step back a little bit. Let's stay at that 50,000 foot level you were talking about as we continue gathering our frequent flyer miles. The Open Market Committee itself, you remember for many years, how does it work? And I don't mean the mechanics, but is it a system that still works well for setting policy, monetary policy for the United States?
Wow, I have to say I have, after 10 years, only the highest respect for the institution and generally how it works, and the quality of people and the dedication of the people who are part of the institution, and that's both at the staff level and the presidents and governors and certainly the chair. I had the privilege of working with Ben Bernanke. He was able to lead the committee to take action when there wasn't much else, and there weren't other institutions able to do that. So you can argue whether the policies worked in any reasonable time frame. Recovery was very sluggish and very slow. It took a long time to get where we are today. But at least the Federal Reserve was able to act in the face of, first, the financial crisis, and secondly, the recession. And I think it was able to act because the committee process is a committee, it's a consensus process. It was first well-led, and then it is built to come to a decision. I think it's an insightful point that I have repeated a few times, is that the the process of the meetings is not necessarily designed to reach a true consensus. It's designed to reach a decision. And when people voted for or supported, if they didn't have the vote, a particular policy position, policy stance, many of us did it for different reasons, but we agreed enough with the overall thought process to support it. Consequently, we're able to take a decision. I think that's refreshing in today's world. So I am a supporter of the basic way it operates. Communication can be improved always. Transparency is important up to a point. And sometimes, an actual meeting may not go as smoothly as you would expect it to go, but at 50,000 feet, I think it works well.
Take us inside one of those meetings. What happens when things go wrong? You guys throw things at each other?
No, I mean it's a very collegial environment. One way to explain this is Monday evening I had dinner in Atlanta with a former president colleague with whom I rarely agreed, but it was a man hug on meeting, and we're close friends. And it very much was the kind of place where you could disagree at the committee table, and often did, or vote differently from each other, and it was it was left in the committee room, and it was extremely collegial environment. Part of that is because it is not fundamentally a political place. It's not. Once people get appointed as governors, or certainly the presidents who are not political appointees, simply don't let national politics invade much, if at all, the process of formulating policy.
Let's talk a little bit about the communications. As you say, they can always be improved, and that is an area where the Fed certainly comes under a lot of criticism. The first question would be, do you talk too much? There's a feeling out there that there are too many voices speaking in too many different directions, and then the markets get confused.
I think there's some validity to that. People often ask me, or asked me when I was in office, whether I got direction from Washington as to what to say in a speech, and I said, no, we are absolute free agents. The only time a president would get into any trouble with speaking would be if what you were saying was really undermining policy. And then it would be an elaborate dance of someone calling the chair of that reserve bank and having a serious the chair having a serious conversation with the president and so forth. Otherwise, we had the ability to go out and say whatever we thought on any subject as frequently as we thought. Now, there is a blackout period, of course, but apart from that, no control whatsoever. In fact, at a dinner some years ago, it was funny at the time, at the Atlanta Fed, Ben Bernanke was in town, and he was sitting at the head table, and another guest there from the private sector said, Chairman Bernanke, how much are you able to control what these presidents have to say? And Ben went, 0, very emphatically, maybe with even a little touch of frustration. It takes certain amount of knowledge of what you're consuming to be a Fed watcher and to separate signal from noise. And I think for the general public, that's too much to ask. But for people in this room and for the whole industry of people who watch monetary policy, I think you all know sort of what to take seriously and who to listen to and who maybe on a particular subject to just not fail to listen to, but understand it's not necessarily a consensus view.
Well, one of the things that, in terms of that, you hear all the time is Dennis Lockhart spoke, might have been interesting, but we really don't care because he's not the chair. What's it
Or
like?
he's not a voter.
What's it like when you're in the room? Is it really a chair-driven institution? You were under two of them. You watched Alan Greenspan in the years prior to that. Is it really up to the chair what's going to happen?
It is a committee process, and the chair has to lead the committee to a decision. Almost always that decision will be in great conformity with what the chair wants to do. But the chair cannot dictate policy. And so the way both Ben Bernanke and Janet Yellen operated and operate, now Janet operates, is she's taking soundings of people as she works up to the meeting, and has conversations with certainly each of the governors and most of the presidents. And sometimes that's delegated to the vice chair to make the phone call, but in my experience, I had many conversations with her, whether I was a voter or not, just to kind of get a sense of what I was thinking as the meeting approached. And that suggests to me that the chair, whether Bernanke or Yellen, was doing a bit of a nose count to make sure that the preferred policy had support and was likely to be supported in the meeting, so that there were, in fact, no surprises coming out of the meeting in terms of dissents. I wouldn't say it's in any way written in stone, but it's sort of the preference of, I think, both of the chairs that I served with, to tolerate dissents up to a point, but not to the point where it casts doubt on the leadership of the chair and doubt on the strength of support for the stance of policy. So putting that in today's terms, when you have only 10 voters, a couple of dissents you can live with, but 3 or more is showing too much of a split committee. All that requires the leadership of the chair, but the chairs, as sometimes you see in the press, don't dictate policy.
Well, how much horse trading is there over this statement and the decision? If you went into a room with 3 dissents and you didn't want to you didn't want to leave the room with 3 dissents, were there negotiations over language or over policy that would actually adjust the statement to take some of the dissent out?
Well, I did not witness much in the way of fundamental or a negotiation over the fundamental thrust of the policy. Either you're going to raise the Fed funds rate range or not. Either you're going to approve a QE program or not. I did see a lot of negotiation over the statement, and that is the statement that comes out at the end of the meeting, which explains to the world what was decided. Very stylized as a statement. Those people who follow it carefully know each paragraph has a purpose and what words matter and what even small changes sometimes convey. Lots of negotiation over that, and usually over the use of a particular word. And I remember early on, central bankers talk in these obscure ways largely because it's a very nuanced process of trying to convey meaning to the public, but the negotiation was over one particular word, and the outcome was to use the word appreciable, which I knew the word, but quite frankly, I never in my life ever uttered the word appreciable. And here I was, just 2008 or 9, and this is the word we settled on as capturing just enough of this, but not too much, And So there's often a fairly healthy discussion of phrases, and sometimes things are cut out of the statement because there's not enough support for them, and even a minority could push hard for cutting something out, and the committee would respect that.
A lot of talk now, of course, about who will be the next chair of the Fed come February. And if you want to insert an endorsement, you can do that. I want to ask, though, what's the most important quality a Fed chair needs to have? And you were trained as an economist. You went to school and got the degrees, but didn't practice that. You came from the business side. Is it important to have an economist head the Fed?
Well, you say I was trained. I got a master's degree with several courses in international economics. That doesn't make me an economist. In my view, there's a big difference between someone with the training of a PhD economist and all the rest of us who took some courses. Over the years, as a banker, I tried to pick up as much economics as I possibly could, but that didn't qualify me the way someone with a PhD training, and I did not live in their world. And I think that gets to an important question that you're raising. Does the chair of the Federal Reserve almost have to be an economist? Well, my first answer is no. I can imagine some of the candidates that have been mentioned in the press, a couple of whom are not PhD economists, being perfectly successful and competent chairs. But what you have to expect is that the person can rather quickly become competent in interacting with countless people who come from that background of a PhD in economics and who are professional economists. And that's a matter of vocabulary, that's a matter of understanding a hell of a lot of theory, it's an understanding literature that backs up a point of view that translates into policy. So someone who was ill-equipped to be able to work in that world or disdainful of it, I think would have a tough time. So I'd say there's a bias to someone with that kind of training and background, professional economist, but I can imagine someone without, with the right personal characteristics, being successful. You asked what does the chair need to be? Well, the chair has to be able to, I'd say there's a bias to someone with that kind of training and background, professional economist, but I can imagine someone without, with the right personal characteristics, being successful. You asked what does the chair need to be? Well, the chair has to be able to lead a process that is a committee process and that has a number of people, each of whom has an independent view and is expected to have an independent view, to an ability to act. The chair has to be able to communicate with the public. The chair has to be able to communicate with the press in a very effective way. And then to a degree, I wouldn't call the chair of the Federal Reserve a CEO in running an institution with I think it's about $5.5 or $6 billion budget and 20,000 people and multiple activities. But the chair has to be able to lead that institution. So that means involvement in supervision and regulation, involvement in payments, involvement in some of the more mundane aspects of what the central bank does, like the management of the movement of cash in and out. Chairs don't spend much time on that, but the chair is the leader of the institution.
Before we let you go, let me ask you one more question about the future of the Fed, for years it's been doctrine that discretion is the best way to make policy. Now you've got at least one new governor coming who has advocated the use of monetary policy rules, Randy Quarles. There's talk Marvin Goodfriend might join, and he has been an advocate of rules. Is there a possibility that we would see a change in the way policy is made to use a rule? A lot of people in the political world would like that. Or is the institution so firmly committed that you're not going to be able to push it in that direction?
Well, I think that's an interesting debate to watch going forward. And I think it is noteworthy that the Federal Reserve put out a paper just a few days ago on the subject of rules. So obviously, Chair Yellen and others are concerned about the drift toward more of a policy making by simple rule approach. Now, let me explain how rules are used today, and that is that in every briefing package that is distributed before an FOMC meeting, there are 2 or 3 pages that walk through a variety of these rules and what they would suggest as the proper appropriate policy stance. So there is, I would say, very serious reference to rules as part of a variety of things that are looked at to come up with a policy position. The parties that are pushing for more of a policy by rule approach want to push that to being more one that if it doesn't require you to adhere to a rule, it requires that you explain why you're not adhering to a rule. And that's where the discretion piece comes in. My own view on this is that I think the rules are useful input, but they are simplifications of a complex economy. You can debate over the validity of the inputs to the algorithm or inputs to the equation. Very serious people who are operating purely from the data and from good methodologies can have different views as to whether this number or that number should go in to a particular rule. So I think it's simply unavoidable that there's an element of discretion and judgment in policymaking. I don't want to celebrate discretion and judgment and say, you know, the rules are BS and we should leave it to the human heart to decide monetary policy. I don't want to go that far. I just think you can take the idea of policy making by algorithm too far.
Fiscal policy has been a major topic of discussion lately because it may affect the way the Fed makes monetary policy. But fiscal policy has been in the debate for a long time because the Fed, through QE, was essentially doing some fiscal policy making and making choices about allocations. How much did that bother people on the Fed? Does it something that might be done again?
Well, again, at a high level, the way to frame an answer to your question is to say the Federal Reserve is about monetary policy, not about fiscal policy, and by and large stays away from fiscal matters and tries not to either comment to get drawn into political debate about the fiscal side of economic policy, and certainly tries to shape monetary policy as much as possible to not have an interaction with the fiscal side. There's a deep body of literature and theory about the fiscal effect of monetary policy, and some of that, of course, is unavoidable. And make monetary policy is going to have some fiscal effects, but as an intentional invasion of the turf of Congress, the Federal Reserve stays away from that. Now, occasionally over the years, particularly Chairman Bernanke would make comments and testimony, particularly when we were struggling with recession, to the effect that it would be nice to have a partner in trying to counter the recession. And it would have been desirable if the fiscal policies were not at cross purposes with monetary policy. I think that was not out of line because the chair and any of us who would say something like that, we're starting from the point that the Federal Reserve, as a matter of responsibility and mandate, clearly has an interest in the performance of the overall economy. And to the extent that fiscal stance was influencing that performance, it was not out of bounds to say something. But never in any detail about what the fiscal policy should be, and never really getting too far into the prerogatives of Congress. So I think that's it continues to be a valid principle. The Federal Reserve should be about monetary policy and leave fiscal policy to the administration and Congress, and comment and provide input either when asked or when it has an influence on the overall effect of policy.
We've got to move along here, so we'll wrap this up. But I have one last question that I have never asked. We've done this around the world, and I've never asked you this question. But you look out at these people here and the location that we're in, and you notice that very often economists are found around fishing holes. And I'm wondering what it is about economics and fishing that go together.
Maybe it's a matter that you're always working with probabilities of outcomes that could be good or not good. And last year I spoke here at the conference, and I began my talk. It was right about the Brexit vote time, or maybe a little after Brexit, as I recall. And I think the Brexit vote had happened, and I came out here, and it was on everyone's mind, what's going to happen to the world economy, how important is Brexit, and so forth. So I used the metaphor of trout fishing. I said, you know, sometimes the waters get cloudy and you have no choice but let the waters clear. And you won't be catching fish, or very many fish, until the waters clear up. And it's just nothing you can do about it. And in economics and in monetary or economic policy, that's also true. Sometimes you just have to be patient and see how things develop. But I don't see I guess you're arguing you see a lot of economists show up at Jackson Hole conference or show up here. That's just because we love beautiful scenery and so forth, like anybody else. But there is a strange affinity with baseball. And it has to do with being disciplines that are built around statistics and numbers. And so Chairman Bernanke, every time he was coming to Atlanta, I would have to go study the nationals to figure out who was doing well, and in order to sort of soften him up with some social conversation, I'd always turn the subject to baseball. Bernanke loved baseball. And there are a lot of economists who love baseball. So, put that in your head. You may want to raise that at some point with another official.
We'll bring some baseball players to the next Rocky Mountain Summit. Well, Dennis, thank you very much for everything you have done for the GIC and for Lockhart.
Thank you, Mike. See if the airline accepts this.
Well, thank you very much, Dennis and Michael.